Have you ever realized that love in families often has nothing to do with affection, but everything to do with control? That behind every smile in the family photo lies a quiet negotiation of worth. I thought blood meant loyalty until I found out I wasn't even on the guest list. It started with silence, the kind that doesn't arrive suddenly, but grows slowly, like fog filling a valley, until everything you once recognized disappears behind it. I remember sitting in the living room, scrolling through social media, when I saw my sister's face, glowing in a white dress, framed by flowers and smiling faces, none of which were mine. There it was, the caption, simple and cruel, "The best day of my life." And I wasn't even invited. At first, I laughed because disbelief is the mind's first defense against pain. I thought maybe it was a mistake, maybe an oversight, maybe the kind of miscommunication that happens when families grow apart but still pretend they're close. But as I stared longer, as the comments poured in, "You both look stunning, so happy for your family." Something inside me began to break in slow motion. I realized this wasn't just an exclusion, it was a declaration, a public rewriting of history where I simply didn't exist. In that moment, I wasn't the sibling anymore. I was a ghost haunting their celebration. I sat there, scrolling through images that looked like fragments of a life I used to belong to. And I asked myself, when did I become the stranger in my own story? The phone buzzed once, a text from my mother. "Hope you're not taking this personally. It's her big day." Her big day. As if my absence were a minor logistical inconvenience, not a wound carefully crafted to make me bleed quietly. Families do this, don't they? They erase you, not with violence, but with the absence of acknowledgement. I thought of all the birthdays I'd shown up for, the nights I'd consoled her, the secrets I'd kept, all invisible currency in a relationship I thought was reciprocal. And now, standing in the silence of my apartment, I realized that I had spent years investing in an illusion, a family that existed only when it was convenient to remember me. I wanted to scream, to call her, to demand an explanation, but I didn't, because I already knew the answer. Exclusion is never accidental. It's a mirror held up to show you your true rank in someone else's hierarchy. And mine was clear. Background character, disposable, irrelevant. That night, I sat by the window, watching the city lights blur through the glass, and I thought of the philosopher Kierkegaard, who said, "Life can only be understood backward, but it must be lived forward." And in that moment, I started to see backward. Every family dinner, every quiet dismissal, every joke at my expense, all forming a pattern I'd refused to see because I was too busy loving people who didn't love me back. The next morning, my phone buzzed again, a tag notification. My aunt had posted another picture, this time captioned, "So proud of our perfect family." Perfect. I remember staring at that word, tracing its shape in my mind. Perfection requires omission, and I was the flaw they edited out. I didn't cry. I just felt the kind of exhaustion that seeps into your bones when you finally stop pretending. Maybe that's what truth feels like. Not a revelation, but a collapse. The quiet realization that everything you believed in was built on the soft sand of denial. For days, I didn't speak to anyone. My silence became its own rebellion, a refusal to feed the narrative they'd written without me. Because when you're excluded, you have two choices: beg for entry or build your own gate. But it wasn't about revenge yet, not then. It was about understanding. Why do families hurt the ones who don't play by their rules? Why does belonging come with a price tag, payable in obedience and silence? Maybe love, in its purest form, isn't about connection, but about control disguised as care. I started writing things down, not to remember, but to dismantle. Every message, every interaction, every lie I'd accepted because I was too afraid to see the truth. And the truth was simple Terrifying, liberating. I was never one of them. It's strange, isn't it? How exclusion doesn't just remove you from a room, it removes you from the version of yourself that existed in relation to others. Without their validation, who was I? A question, unanswered, echoing in an empty room. But somewhere in that echo, I found the beginning of something else. Not anger, not grief, but clarity. The kind that comes only after you've lost everything you thought you needed. So I stopped waiting for an apology. I stopped hoping for reconciliation. And in that stillness, I made a promise to myself. One day, they would remember my name. Not because I begged to belong, but because I'd become impossible to ignore. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It began quietly, in the mundane rhythm of my days, in the subtle shift between grief and resolve. I started with something small. I deleted every photo that tied me to them. Not out of hatred, but out of necessity. Each image felt like an anchor, keeping me tethered to a version of myself that existed only to be accepted. One by one, I erased them, watching my phone gallery turn from crowded to empty, a visual metaphor for freedom. There was something almost sacred about that emptiness, as if clearing the past made room for something real. I stopped checking their social media, stopped wondering what they were doing, stopped trying to decode their silence. For the first time in years, my attention belonged entirely to me. But healing, I learned, isn't a gentle process. It's violent in its honesty. It forces you to face what you've been avoiding. I realized that I had spent my life performing, the dutiful sister, the understanding daughter, the peacemaker, always smoothing edges, always apologizing first. It was a role so deeply ingrained that I didn't even recognize it as performance anymore. But once the illusion cracked, there was no way to put it back together. Every polite smile felt like betrayal. Every "I'm fine" like a lie I couldn't sustain. So I stopped pretending. I let the discomfort show. People called me distant, cold, even selfish. But for once, those words didn't sting. Because maybe selfishness was just another word for survival. I began to reinvent myself, not as an act of revenge, but as a reclamation. I took all that energy I used to spend fitting into their story and redirected it into building mine. I started writing essays, reflections, fragments of truth that felt too heavy to say aloud. I shared them anonymously online. It was strange at first, exposing my pain to strangers. But what came back wasn't pity, it was recognition. People wrote to me saying, I thought I was the only one. That was the moment I understood that pain is rarely unique, it's just quietly universal. The stories we hide are the bridges that connect us. And suddenly, what had been isolation began to feel like belonging, not through blood, but through truth. The more I wrote, the more I saw patterns, not just in my own family, but in every message I read. The same manipulation disguised as care, the same guilt framed as love. Families everywhere running on unspoken contracts. Obey, and you are loved. Resist, and you are exiled. I realized I wasn't just telling my story, I was documenting a system, one built on emotional currency and silence. The more I exposed it, the more people responded. My words began to travel. A few thousand views turned into hundreds of thousands. I wasn't sure how it happened, an algorithm, a moment, or maybe the collective hunger for truth, but my story spread. And with every share, I felt a strange mixture of power and fear. Because once the truth leaves your hands, it belongs to the world. Then one morning, I woke to an email from a journalist. They wanted to interview the anonymous writer whose essay had sparked an online storm about family dynamics. I froze. My anonymity had been my shield, but now the world wanted a face. I hesitated for days, torn between fear of exposure and the intoxicating possibility of being heard. Finally, I said yes. Not because I wanted fame, but because I wanted ownership of my narrative. For so long, others had told my story, twisted, softened, repackaged for their comfort. This time, it would be mine, unfiltered and unapologetic. When the article came out, my name was there in bold letters, and for the first time, it felt like I'd reclaimed something sacred. Not revenge, not validation, but truth. It happened slowly at first, the way wildfires begin with a single spark no one notices. One clip I posted reached 100,000 views overnight. Another passed 1 million within days. Soon, my inbox was overflowing with questions, theories, and declarations from strangers who believed they knew me better than I knew myself. They dissected my captions like scripture, arguing about the symbolism of every frame, every pause, every color. I had become an idea, not a person, and ideas, once unleashed, don't ask for permission. I watched the numbers rise on my phone like a heartbeat I couldn't control. 10 million, 20, 50. My wedding had gone global, but it wasn't just a viral moment anymore. It was a cultural event, an emotional Rorschach test. People saw in it whatever they needed to: empowerment, revenge, justice, madness. They debated whether I was a genius or a sociopath, a visionary or a liar. I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. The truth had already stopped mattering. News outlets began calling. Headlines appeared on digital covers. The mystery bride who outsmarted her family. The viral wedding that never was. But no one could confirm whether the wedding had truly happened, and I made sure it stayed that way. Ambiguity was my currency. Reality had become elastic, and I was stretching it further every day. My family stayed silent for a while, hoping the noise would die down, but it didn't. My sister's name began trending again, not for her real wedding, but because people had found old photos and drawn comparisons. "This is her sister," one post said, "the one she excluded." The comments were brutal, merciless, relentless. The internet had decided who the villain was, and no amount of explanation could undo that. I didn't plan for that. I told myself it wasn't my fault. I had never asked for anyone to harass them. But deep down, I knew the line between creation and destruction had blurred. The story had mutated, fed by millions of eyes, each one adding a new layer of distortion. What I had built as art had become something else, something alive, something hungry. I remember waking up one morning to see that my supposed husband, the fictional character I had hinted at, had been identified by the internet. They had found a man who vaguely matched the silhouette from my videos. His photos were everywhere, his private life dissected, his friends questioned. He wasn't part of it. He had no idea who I was. But the narrative didn't care. The machine had decided, and it kept consuming. That was the day I realized I had lost control. I had built a world so convincing that it no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the audience, to the algorithms, to the comments, to the collective imagination that thrives on ambiguity and conflict. In trying to expose illusion, I had created one so perfect it devoured truth itself. And yet, I couldn't stop. The attention was intoxicating. Every notification was a heartbeat, every share a pulse. My face appeared in reaction videos, think pieces, conspiracy threads. People analyzed my tone, my posture, my background decor, as if decoding a message from another world. Somewhere, my sister must have been watching it all. The reversal of power, the public spectacle of poetic justice. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like vertigo. It began to unravel not with an explosion, but with a whisper. The kind of quiet decay that starts when people stop asking questions and start looking for answers. Someone finally noticed the inconsistencies. A journalist traced timelines, compared shadows in my videos, dissected metadata. And just like that, the cracks began to show. The illusion that once felt eternal began to tremble under the weight of scrutiny. The article dropped one morning with the headline, "The viral wedding was a lie." Simple, efficient, devastating. Within hours, the tone of the internet shifted. Admiration turned to outrage, fascination to ridicule. The same people who once defended me now called me manipulative, deceitful, insane. They didn't just doubt the story, They doubted my humanity. I had given them a fantasy, and now that it had crumbled, they wanted revenge. It's strange how quickly love becomes disgust when people realize they've been fooled. They said I played them, but wasn't that what they wanted? A story to feel alive through, a spectacle to feed on? I wanted to scream that I hadn't lied. I had created a mirror. They just didn't like what they saw in it. My family, predictably, seized the moment. My sister posted a statement, polished, rehearsed, dripping with self-pity, about how she forgave me and hoped I'd find peace. It was a masterstroke of image control. The internet applauded her grace, while I became the villain in the narrative she'd always wanted. The roles had reversed once more, and the cycle of illusion continued, just wearing different faces. I stopped posting. For days, I said nothing. Silence again, that familiar, suffocating silence that started it all. Only this time, it wasn't chosen, it was imposed. My followers left in waves, my sponsors withdrew, my inbox filled with mockery and threats. I had built my own cage and called it art. Now I was locked inside, surrounded by echoes of my own creation. And yet, somewhere in the middle of the ruin, I felt something close to peace. Because for the first time, there was no pretending left to do. The masks were off, theirs and mine. I had lost everything that wasn't real, and maybe that was the only way to find what was. I started walking at night when no one could recognize me. I'd see posters of weddings and storefronts, perfect couples frozen in time, smiling at futures that probably didn't exist. I realized that we all build illusions. Mine just happened to be more visible. People post pictures of happiness they don't feel, of love they don't understand, of perfection that suffocates them. My sin wasn't deception, it was honesty, taken too far. One night, I stood by a lake outside the city, where the lights reflected so perfectly on the water that it was impossible to tell where the world ended and the reflection began. I thought about my sister, about my family, about the millions of strangers who had looked at me and seen a story instead of a soul. I thought about truth, not as something pure, but as something constantly negotiated, traded, diluted. Maybe truth isn't a solid thing we can hold. Maybe it's vapor, visible only when light hits it at the right angle. I realized I didn't hate my sister anymore. She had done what people do, preserved her image, maintained control, protected her version of reality. We were the same, just playing different roles in the same theater. Family, I learned, isn't defined by blood, but by performance. Some perform love, others perform detachment. I had simply made my performance louder. But the world doesn't forgive those who expose its rules too clearly. The price of showing the illusion is that you're forever seen as part of it. I had wanted to teach them something about attention, about validation, about the danger of mistaking virality for meaning. But lessons don't survive the spectacle that delivers them. They only become entertainment. Somewhere, deep inside, I wondered if I had become the very thing I set out to destroy. Another illusion built on performance, another story curated for approval. And maybe that's the real curse of going viral. You stop being real to anyone else, and eventually you stop being real to yourself. Somewhere late at night, I wondered if people still talk about me, if my sister still feels the sting of my shadow, if someone still re-uploads my videos and argues about what was real. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. It doesn't matter, because the story was never about a wedding or a family or revenge. It was about the mirror we all fear looking into, the one that shows not who we pretend to be, but what we've become trying to be seen. And maybe that's the final truth I can offer. The line between illusion and reality isn't something we cross once, it's something we live on, every day, with every choice, every post, every silence. The only difference is whether we admit it. So when people ask me now, was any of it real? I tell them the only answer that feels true. It was real while you believed it.
Isn't that what all reality is? And in that answer lies everything. The collapse of expectation, the triumph of perspective, the unsettling thrill of realizing that the world you live in is partially constructed by those who observe it. I had become both storyteller and story, artist and audience, illusion and truth, a paradox that no one could untangle, least of all myself. Months later, a friend sent me an article. It said, "The viral bride has disappeared. Maybe that's her final art piece." They still didn't understand. It wasn't art anymore. It was survival. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in the dark and consider the life I could have had if I had chosen compliance, if I had accepted exclusion silently, if I had let the narrative write itself without interference. But then I think, would that version of me even be alive? Or would she have simply dissolved quietly into irrelevance, unseen and unheard, a ghost in the background of someone else's story? And that's when I finally understood. The measure of existence isn't in how others include you, but in how fully you live the story you refuse to be excluded from. Perhaps that is the harshest truth of all, that visibility, power, connection, and meaning are not granted. They are claimed. They are forged in the quiet spaces between pain and creation, in the moments when you dare to exist unapologetically, even when the world insists you shouldn't. And in claiming that space for myself, I became untouchable, not because I was loved, not because I was recognized, but because I refused to vanish.